Welcome to today's edition of Daytime Dialogues. It's a pleasure to welcome an expert in his field, one of the people we have had the pleasure of reading his works and learning from him, and also getting to know him for many, many years, because Rabbi Dr. Shlomo Brody is not only the executive director of the Halachic Organ Donor Society, known as HODS, not only the Jewish law live columnist for the Jerusalem Post, and not only previously the founding director of the Tikva Overseas Student Initiative, a former instructor at Yeshivat HaKotel, but he's also married to a Chicagoan. And so we are thrilled to have known Rabbi Brody for many, many years, and to have had him in shul for many times. And it's a pleasure to have you back. And please, of course, my best regards to your wife, Rocky. Rabbi Brody, thank you for joining me today.
It's great to be with you, Rabbi. Thank you for the invitation. And besides all the hats you wear, you're also an aide kedushin at my wedding. So,
we take care of our people.
Indeed.
So I want to start today talking about HODS. HODS has been around for a long time, and it's done a lot of things, primarily in the area of halachically guiding people in terms of organ donations. But since you took over as the executive director, things have begun to change. How are you changing things, and why?
Yeah, thanks. I mean, we've been around for about 20 years, and to the great credit, I think, of the organization, it put the topic of organ donation, both with regard to kidneys and altruistic donation, and also posthumous organ donation, on the map. I mean, it's the type of topic which I think we helped bring along for people to discuss a lot. When I was approached about taking over the organization as executive director, I looked around and saw that there's a lot of other issues that are particularly pressing right now when it comes to end-of-life care. I mean, organ donation is a super important topic, but it just doesn't come up every day. Whereas other types of end-of-life care decision-making is very pressing, comes up all the time. Questions of DNIs and DNRs and living wills. And we felt it was a sort of a natural pivot to be able to help the broader Jewish community on a topic that comes up much more often. We still care, of course, about organ donation, but when you build an organization, you want to make it as useful and helpful as possible. And so we're pivoting in that direction.
And so, for example, what are you doing differently? In the past, people would carry around their HODS organ donation card. HODS was involved, and we'll get to it later, the question of brain death versus the cessation of heart function. What are you doing differently now?
Well, I think, in terms of the card, we're trying to broaden out a bit in terms of the topics that we're having people think about with end of life. So one of the topics we're first working on right now is a new Advanced Healthcare Directive and Conversation Primer. I just completed writing that with actually one of your previous guests, Rabbi Jason Weiner from Los Angeles. And we've had a whole slew of healthcare professionals and rabbis and poskim look it over. And we're hoping that will be launched in the next couple of months. And of course, it will include the topic of organ donation there, but in the context of a broader set of questions, which we think people should be talking about. And I think that's a key first move for all people when they're thinking about end-of-life decision making is, what are my values and preferences? Who do I want my surrogate or proxy to be? Which rabbi do I want to turn to? And we hope to help facilitate that, make it easier for people to do that.
Is there any controversy behind setting up such advanced directives?
There's always controversy about something in some ways. But in general, I think that the Frum world, the Orthodox world today, is very much in support of the basic concept of designating a proxy, of making some form of legal declaration, of making sure the hospital knows how you want your body to be handled, for example, after death, no autopsies unless necessitated by halacha, and some of those basic types of questions. And that's pretty broad and standard. There are some, follow-up questions which relate to issues of DNRs, do not resuscitate, or DNIs, do not intubate. And here you get into some of the trickier halachic debates about end-of-life care. And so you'll find different directives have different types of questions. And that's why we're crafting the text carefully to be within the mainstream consensus of halacha, but still giving people a range of options.
Well, to talk about the mainstream is wherever anyone seems to be themselves. So there's there's a wide range. Who, if you were to say somebody, let's say, who normally would be viewed more to the right versus more to the left, like where are your banks? Where are the boundaries of that stream?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. You're right, everyone thinks they're sort of mainstream, but I think we're working in the end of life care decision making to establish certain principles in which the poskim that we're talking to are people like Mordechai Willig, Rabbi Herschel Schechter, Rabbi Dr. Avram Steinberg here in Israel, people that I think have a real wide acceptance in the broader Orthodox world. And I think we have principles that we can also teach and expand to be meaningful for the broader Jewish community. I
Now,
mean, our hope is that our organization will be able to give support to broader community as well.
so one of the big debates always out there was the question of the definition of death. And it was a debate that I think at times overwhelmed the mission, even of Hodes earlier on. Has there been any movement on that? Or is there more of a
Yeah, I mean,
consensus?
well, I'll tell you two things. One is that there's a little bit of a movement, and the second thing is that death ain't what it used to be, and I'll explain what I mean by that. It's interesting. The question of brain death declaration is the only topic that religious Zionist poskim in Israel agree upon. I mean, religious Zionist poskim disagree about a slew of issues: conversion standards, kashrut, shmita, and a whole slew of other, contemporary halachic controversies. The one topic that it's the broad consensus, and it's sort of wild how that developed, is that brain death is the halachic criterion for death, and the organ donation is not only permissible, but it's laudatory. And there's a whole sorts of reasons why that happened, but it's been successive chief rabbis that have declared that. And even, poskim who sort of, aren't fully in the religious Zionist camp, but sort of between the religious Zionist Haredi camp, Shlomo Amar, for example, or the Rabbi Laus, both father and son, they're all supportive of it. It's really fascinating. In the Haredi community, people see it as either a suffix, they're not sure, they're against it. And I'd say in the diaspora, in places like North America or England, which have influences from both directions, it became a big fight. And you're right, Hodes sort of, it was hard to deal with that options. I'm looking to follow the model that's been established in Australia by the Besdin in Sydney and by the Besdin in Johannesburg in South Africa, which has basically said, we're not going to decide on this machloket, but we think it's a legitimate option. And when a person wants to donate, we're going to give full supervision and support. I think that it's a nice way of lowering the tone of the debate and keeping this still, though, a very important live option.
Now, you have a very broad perspective, both in terms of academia, where you have a foot in that door, and you also in the area of halacha, which you are very well versed in. I've always found it fascinating that when it came specifically to brain death, Rabbi Tendler Zal, who I spoke to him on a number of occasions, specifically on that shaila, insisted vociferously that the Shver, Rav Moshe Feinstein, his father-in-law, held that definition of death was the brain. And there are other people who say Rav Moshe never said that, and they hold the exact opposite in the name of Rav Moshe. Do you have any insight on how that's possible, that you can have the same person and you view them in so totally opposite ways?
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's hard to say. I do want to steer away in general from, I think, this debate about what deceased poskim said. I mean, it's not so healthy, but, it's an interesting issue because it wasn't just Rabbi Tendler, but, his sons, in particular of David Feinstein, did Sak Halacha L'Maisa rule in a couple of cases that brain death was death and allowed organ donation. And the Hode's website has a series of doctors, I think there are about 5 or 6, including some very significant, well-known figures in the Orthodox community who say they discussed it with Moshe as well. And, there are other people, of course, who I respect who, they read Rav Moshe's writings and say they don't see that there. I agree that there is a little bit of crypticness in the writings. But when you have some crypticness, and it's a little bit murky, I think the oral tradition usually should be relied on. I mean, it's a weird case. here you have the family members, and it's the grandsons as well, right? It's Rav Shabtai Rappaport, it's others who are very insistent that Rav Moshe accepted brain death in support of organ donation. I can't think of another example in which family members and others who spoke to him are so insistent that this is what post-ex position was, and yet there's still opposition to it. So I don't know, I don't know how to resolve it. It's a very interesting case. But like I said, Rav Moshe's position, of course, is very important. But there are other poskim who supported, organ donation independent of Moshe, and there are other poskim who, didn't. And so, either way, I don't want to get too caught up in exactly what Rav Moshe said, but it's a fascinating case example.
And to shift one more time, technology. You started talking about death ain't what it once was.
Yeah.
Technology, medical technology has shifted so drastically. How has that impacted decision making?
Oh, I mean, the technology is, we don't even, I think, realize or appreciate how much things are changing. Even on this issue of when is death. I mean, today in places like California, about 40% of organ donation is happening at what's known as donation after cardiac death. And that sounds great, meaning that all the poskim would agree. After cardiac death, we'd all accept the fact that someone is halachically dead. But it's a little bit more complicated for two reasons. The way in which it's done is that they withdraw care. I mean, they're removing, let's say, the ventilator, for example, which raises other halachic issues. And more interestingly, once the person has been removed from the ventilator, they wait about 2 to 5 minutes, depending on the hospital, some even up to 10 minutes. And then they get the heart beating again. That's a remarkable technology, which after a person has been declared dead, they can actually get a heart functioning enough to where some organs, and in some cases, even the heart, can be procured or retrieved for organ donation. So what does that mean when you ask the question of what is death today? If we have a technology in which we can get the organs to function after a person has been declared dead. There's a recent study that did this with a pig that did it in full hour after the pig had died. And actually, I'll be speaking in Oratora in Skokie in a week and a half from now, precisely on this topic, because the technology is going to radically change what that experience means. And we, as people who care about halacha, need to think about how to deal with that reality.
But the technology is not just about the moment of death. It's about leading up to everything, how the amount of care that can be given to keep a person alive.
Oh, yeah. It's so sensitive. Sensitive.
Do you have a sense of how the hospitals in Israel, especially Shaare Zedek, which follows a halachic protocol, how they're dealing with determining how much care to provide?
So I actually literally today was having a conference with Professor Steinberg, Avram Steinberg of Shaare Zedek, with about 20 palliative care and end-of-life care physicians and other healthcare professionals, precisely on this topic. You should know it's not just Shaare Zedek. The law in Israel, which is known as the terminally ill law, the Chok HaNoten Lamut, applies to all of the country, and it was created with halacha in mind. I'd say that I would say that in many ways, the Israeli hospitals officially follow the rulings of Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, which is pretty remarkable when you think about it. But it's sort of his guidelines are sort of governing the official Israeli law. The problem is that in many cases, the law doesn't cover some of the difficult cases. And I'll give you an example. When people have advanced stages of dementia, they could be living for quite a long time, but certainly more than 6 months. The law only covers for 6 months. And so you can have people living for a long time, and the question is, well, what are you doing? You're using technology to keep them alive, but for what purpose? And I think that's going to be a huge issue and continue to be an issue, both in Israel and across the Jewish world, with so many difficult cases like that. Powerful technology, keeping people alive, but for what purpose?
And you just mentioned that they follow the approach of Rav Shlomo Zalman. I find that fascinating, since the Tzitz Eliezer, Rabbi Eliezer Waldenberg, was the famous authority both at Shaare Zedek Hospital and had so many response about that. Why was Rav Shlomo Zalman the paradigm of psak?
Well, it's an interesting sort of historical question in some ways of when the timing worked out and how the law got created. But I'd say that Rav Shlomo Zalman, while it's true that Tzitz Eliezer had a huge influence, I think Rav Shlomo Zalman's psakim in Israel became more dominating in some ways, and they were more acceptable to the broader Israeli population, which still, by the way, the medical community still has a lot of, pet peeves or issues with some of the law in Israel, and particularly about withholding care in certain cases, particularly when it comes to artificial nutrition. But Shlomo Zalman had a lot of influence on a lot of the key figures in Jewish medical ethics.
And in the United States, are we finding similar challenges, or is it greater challenges because we don't have a halachic guideline, but with technology and with end-of-life issues?
Yeah, I think the United States, and not just the United States, England and Canada are really having serious issues with this. I mean, the United States in some ways has greater respect for religious conscientiousness or conscience or objections, but I'd say there's a lot of extremes in some ways. On the one hand, you have a certain, call it secular approach, but certain progressive approach in some circles, which doesn't particularly value life when it gets to sort of later stages and reduce the productivity of the human being. And so there's sort of this approach of saying, what's the point of people keeping alive? There's the opposite extreme, though, and it's not just in Jewish circles, but in other circles as well, where it's sort of like keep people going as long as possible. And so you have this like culture clash, as you do on so many issues in the United States and other Western countries. And I can't tell you how many stories I hear in both extremes. Either the hospital wanted to, tell a person to sign a DNR, and the rabbi is like, for what? Why? Like, this person can live and live well for many years. Or the hospital will say to me, I don't understand why you rabbis are trying to keep this person's heart going for no purpose at all. And so there is this broader culture clash in some ways. And I think that the community has to think long and hard about how to find that middle ground. And it's going to be a tremendous challenge in the coming years. And that's precisely what we want our organization to be, to help guide this type of dilemma.
And someone needs understanding, support, guidance. They would reach out to you at Hodes?
Absolutely. I mean, we're going to have a hotline, which will be available for Balabatan, for lay people, for patients and families, but also for rabbis who want to have some extra help or consultation, and for healthcare professionals who need help dealing with the sensitivities of a Jewish patients. And I've been speaking all across, the United States and Canada to different figures and bringing people on board, and we're excited for what we'll be able to offer.
And I understand that soon you're going to be renaming the organization to E16.
E16, indeed.
Yeah.
E16.
And the choice of E16, I have my suspicions, but why are you picking specifically that?
Im lo achshav E16, right? If not now, when? We want to get people to think a little bit more earlier on about some of these dilemmas, which will make end-of-life decision-making much more meaningful. We want to upstream some of those decisions and conversations. And, E16, on the one hand, it's a call to action, right? It's a declaration. It also has a question, right, at it. Right? And I think that indicates a little bit of the modesty that we want to bring to this. But there's a lot of uncertainty when it comes to end-of-life, decision-making and the whole process of aging as a whole. And we hope we can, help people navigate some of those difficult choices they have to make.
And in terms of people who want more information, right now, the website is still hods, HODS.org.
Yes, hods.org. But in the next month or two, we're already going through our alpha, stage of the website, and it'll all be redirected to amatai.org. So we're excited for it.
So let me switch gears yet once again and go over to what the halacha pieces you've been doing both in Jerusalem Post and also in journals you've been writing. You address a lot of different issues. In Jerusalem Post, what do you think has been the most popular or your most favorite topic that you addressed over the years? You've been doing it for 15 years.
Yeah, 15 years. It's an interesting challenge because I only have 1,000 words, right, to capture usually a great debate. And that sometimes can be difficult. It's been something which I have had a skill I've had to work on over the years. I typically enjoy the most the issues which are in the headlines right now. And somehow I'm able, because the timing works out, to write about those issues and be able to give people some perspective on it. I mean, a couple of years ago, there's this big debate over who should get priority at a scene of a terror attack. When the ambulance comes, if the terrorist is more seriously wounded than the victim, who should go get first priority treatment in terms of triage? It's a big debate in Israel. And I was able to write about it and sort of capture that debate and conversation. And I found that very meaningful, like in bringing the Jewish voice to this public discourse.
And
my column that's coming out this week. Oh, the answer was, well, that's been always the criticism I'm taking, that people say to me, we can't always tell what you actually think. And the truth is, when I first started writing, I was very much stayed on the sidelines, meaning I sort of, it's like, sort of laid out the debate. In more recent years, for better or for worse, maybe I'm wise or not, but I've been taking sides a bit more on those issues. In that particular case, I did feel that the priority should be given to the terror victim. I think it's more comparable to a battlefield scene. But I did give credence to the opposing position, which said that there's a miracle in Israel called the Israeli healthcare system, which somehow is able to separate the entire Arab-Israeli conflict. And when you get to those hospitals, things work out well. That's a very important factor to keep in mind, which you're not going to find in the classic halachic text, but you have to think about it.
And this week's column, I cut you off. This week is going to be about what?
There's a big controversy that there's a terrible mix-up in one of the hospitals here with IVF and IVF treatment, where an embryo is discovered to be, being developing in a woman who it wasn't from that couple. And they weren't either the sperm or egg donors. And the question became, well, whose child does this belong to? And there's a very big discussion in the newspapers here. And this is all going on in utero, right before the baby was born. Now that the baby's been born, the question is, well, who should this baby belong to, particularly since they can't find the genetic parents? And the chief rabbi came out with his own declaration, and I discussed a bit about that background. And it's a fascinating issue, and I hope I have a positive reaction this time as well.
I'm not going to ask you the decision on that one, because let people read it in this week's column. And you've also been doing a lot of writing in journals of different halachic topics. In those, what makes you decide to write about this topic or that? And there's some of them that come to mind, especially some of them that affect the modern Orthodox community, or whatever we're going to call our community, and some of our halachic practices.
Yeah, there's something exciting about being able to delve deep into a topic. Meaning, if I've written a couple hundred columns in the post of 1,000 words, I can sort of give people a feel for the debate. But sometimes when you have the opportunity to really delve deep into a sugya, into a topic, and try to explain why this is important, why this should matter to us and the way we think about halacha, our community, that's a unique and a sort of exciting experience. And I remember when I was a smicha student, and I was reading these articles and I was thinking, okay, wow, these are really tremendous, and maybe one day I'll be able to write one as well. And so I consider it to be a zchut that I have the privilege and an opportunity to write in such journals. Occasionally I wonder who's reading this, meaning who reads these journals, especially in the long articles. But over time I get feedback, so I'm confident someone.
No, people are reading them, and then of course, your book, a guide to the complex contemporary halachic debates, which came out and won the National Jewish Book Award in 2014, is fascinating for anyone who hasn't read it yet. I'm making a plug. It's available on the Koren website, available on Amazon, and at the bookstore near you as well. I understand there's a new book that you're putting out on Judaism Confronts War, Jewish Military Ethics for the 21st Century.
Yeah, I just sent it in, the manuscript, about 2 weeks ago.
Wow.
And it's super exciting. I've been working on it for a few years. It's a little bit different type of writing style. I'm trying to tell a story in many ways. of how rabbis in particular, but Jews in general, confronted the ethics of war starting from World War I. The Jews weren't that engaged in warfare for many, many centuries. And all of a sudden we're engaged and somewhat deeply engaged in warfare. And we had to start thinking about these questions of how to fight war and when we should fight war. And there's some fascinating historical figures. So I went a little bit out of my comfort zone to try to tell both the history and halacha and philosophy. And I hope it comes out well.
Who's the publisher of this one?
Also Maggid Books.
The Maggid Books,
And,
also Koren website, Amazon, anywhere else you want to buy a good book.
Yeah,
And-
they'll be out. It'll take a few months, but it's gonna come out also both in English and in Hebrew, which is exciting as well.
Are the other ones the other one isn't in Hebrew, it's just in English, correct?
Correct. Yes, this will be my first Hebrew book, which I'm excited for.
Oh, excellent. And who was the most surprising character involved in this issue of Jewish ethics and war and halacha and war?
Well, I find the most inspiring to have been Rav Shlomo Goren. Of course, he was the first chief rabbi of Tzahal and then chief rabbi of Israel. Some issues, I agreed more or less with him on different topics, but Rav Goren believed that Judaism has a real ethical vision, how to fight war, which is very unique in some ways. Some of the people, other poskim got involved in it, didn't have such a thorough and holistic perspective on it. And Rav Goren really pushed this topic in very profound ways. And I found his model also as a fighter, in fact, he was a fighter as well, but as a thinker on these issues to be tremendously inspiring.
Where would he have gotten that perspective from?
It's fascinating. I mean, listen, he fought in the underground. He's both in the Haganah and also a little bit in the Lehi, which is interesting. And it's a little bit, I discussed a little bit of that story there. And, it's very interesting in general. Where do Jews get the fighting spirit from? And where do they get it from? They didn't have it for many hundreds of years. Rav Goren was very inspired by Tanakh and very inspired by sovereignty. He was a bit inspired by Ben Gurion, who he had a close relationship with as well. And he was very inspired by this idea that halacha is relevant for the modern era, for the modern state, in all of its complexities.
I think that there's two great stories of Rav Goren. One was his going onto Har HaBayit and his thinking of how he could go into the Golden Dome by saying he's clearing it out to make sure there are no terrorists. He's the only observant Jew who ever walked in there since the times of Kohanim Gedolim, I'm sure. And then how he captured Hebron by himself by accident. It's like he got ahead of the army. He didn't realize he was ahead of the army, and he took control of the Marat HaMachpelah.
Yeah, people don't realize though, he was almost killed in the beginning of the war. And one of the first days of the 6-day war, he was down south and one of his driver got shot. He was hiding in the sand dunes. His original shofar got blown up when it was shot. And the famous shofar that he blows, he grabs on the way to the old city from his father-in-law's house. So he's a tremendous figure.
What's the next book now that you've put this one to bed?
I think there'll be something about organ donation and some of the new challenges there as well. I'm talking to Professor Avram Steinberg about some form of collaborative work. And I wrote a doctorate on the history of how law and halacha changed over time and how specific laws evolved. I just had the first couple of articles come out of that, and I'd like to eventually see that come out as a book as well.
That should be fascinating, and it's a very different way of writing because you take something very scientific and have to make it a little more popular, I guess. I remember those days well. I really, our time is coming to a close, and I just want to thank you for being part of this, but even more so for that vision of how Hodes is going to transform itself. My assumption is that by rebranding, redirecting, many more people are going to be involved in the efforts of what will be a Matai. And I'm assuming that's also your great hope on this as well.
Absolutely. I think that our current people that have been involved over the years are going to stay involved. They're very excited about it. And many more people right now are very excited about the direction we're going in. And, please God, we'll succeed and help people and help me Mekadosh Shem Shemayim, which is the ultimate goal.
And I thank you for your time. I wish you much success in your next Shabbos at the Baron Hirsch in Memphis, and then back here in Chicago for the Greenfield lecture. And thank you again for all of the leadership. Remember, hodes.org is the way you can keep up the thing, even after it's going to be called Eimatai. I'm sure it's going to point to the new website. Rabbi
Indeed,
Brody,
indeed.
thank you very much for your time. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Uh,
Great to be with you.
Good to see you.